I have a very secure password. James Dean and Marilyn Monroe are pictured here. And you might be wondering why they're pictured side by side, as did I, when I was headed to the bathroom during a speaker dinner. And I stood there and thought, am I feeling more like James Dean today? Cool, calm, collected? Or am I feeling more like Marilyn, flirty, breathy? We use really strange things to identify bathrooms. One here that's pictured is nuts and bolts. I stood there for a long time wondering, am I more functional, like aggressively functional, like a nut, or am I more passively functional, like a bolt? Or even weirder, a lasso and a ladle. I think it's a play on words about lads and lasses, but again, I wasn't sure if I was feeling more soupy or more cow-person-y. And even when we use something very simple, like this depiction of someone who is pantsless and someone in a triangular dress, which we've now codified as men and women, it creates a little bit of a conundrum. And really, whenever I walk into the bathroom and I see something like this, I ask myself, which oppressive, limiting, and incomplete social construct do you wish to possibly falsely identify as in order to do little more than ease the temporary discomfort of strangers you'll likely never see again, risking deep dysphoria, misgendering, and repeated trauma to do so? Said more simply, the TLDR is, what are you? And my response is, on some days like today, I feel more, scare quote, masculine, because we've associated and connected strengths and suits and self-assuredness with that word. But on other days, I feel feminine because we've associated vulnerability and dresses and makeup with that word. Does that help? Going to the restroom without an identity crisis is a privilege. I'm privileged to present as a gender that's not antithetical to who I am. And I don't often experience gender dysphoria. That's another privilege. But I also don't believe in the gender binary. And so I identify as a gender nonconforming person. I also identify as a woman. And for many of you, I might be using terms that you've never heard before, or maybe terms that you've only casually heard, and you're wondering about the contradiction of being gender nonconforming and being a woman. Well, luckily, I built you an open source project called Self-Defined. It is a dictionary that I'm working on, and you might be wondering, why do we need a new dictionary? And it's because that the dictionaries that we use are all deeply rooted in the systems of society. My goal with Self-Defined is to create a space where we can define ourselves. Words that we use to describe ourselves are always growing and changing, especially with regards to very sensitive things like our gender, our sexuality, our ethnicity and race. And I also want to create a place where we can provide helpful alternates to what has become very commonly ableist, racist, culturally appropriative, medically appropriative vernacular. Every time I hear the word crazy, insane, any ableist dumb, any ableist slur like that, I go out of my way to correct people, and it's exhausting. So I'm hoping that through this dictionary, we can do a bit better self-education, and I'll eventually build an API and a bot where it can kind of help to do some of this traumatic, emotional labor that we place on people. So going back to this, James Dean and Marilyn Monroe, or these depictions of the pantsless scare quote man, or the triangular scare quote woman, something that I have to use 10 times a day shouldn't give me an identity crisis. And even when we try to be progressive and cheeky with it, such as the depiction here of a merperson and a centaur with a very disproportionate bird on its extended arm, and it says, whatever, just wash your hands. What this says to me is that non-binary, gender non-conforming, and agender people are mythical creatures, and trans people as well. Or this, which is a depiction of the half pantsless person and the half triangle spliced together, and underneath it says, we don't care. And what that says to me is, you don't care about my gender. And it says non-binary and trans people are literally splices of the two genders. That's kind of messed up. And even here in dear Nottingham, which I'm having a great time, my first time, as Simon picked me and my friend up, notice the lift had an icon on it. And what's depicted is the pantsless scare quote man and the triangular scare quote woman in a lift. And you'll also notice that he is the one who pushes the buttons, not her. So she stands side by side obediently. So this morning in the hotel, I just stood there until someone came and pushed the button for me. And really, my question is, what does gender have to do with the bathroom at all? Why do you have to make everything about gender? It's an over-designed solution to a non-existent scare quote problem. And the problem really, to put it as cutely as I could, is that a room I can release some soft/hardware in? Thank you for laughing. And more importantly and more helpfully, will I be able to change my baby there on something other than the gross ground? And will everything be accessible to me? So really, the solution is to label it with WC, as you do here, restroom, toilet, potty, whatever. Call it whatever you want. But at the end of the day, we need to focus on what it is, not who the person who walks in through the door. And what this makes me realize is that we have an infatuation with the binary. What's depicted here is a scene from one of my favorite movies, Mean Girls. It is slightly problematic. But Regina George, the main Mean Girl character, is representing the binary, and Lindsay Lohan, who plays Katie Stanton, she is trying to fit in at this high school, and she represents us, and the caption reads, "Why are you so obsessed with me?" And we're obsessed with the binary. Hello, my name is Tatiana Mack, and I am here to talk to you about our banal binary. A few housekeeping things to get out of the way. If you'd like to access the slides, I have them on slides.com. The short link is v.gd/banal binary. Or you can slide into my DMs at Tatiana T. Mack. A little thing that I'd love for everyone to do is, if you have Twitter and you have your name, listen to what your name sounds like with a screen reader, because up until not that long ago, I realized that it read my name as Titation Mack, which is not how you say my name. So let's start with the intent. When we look at the binary, as someone who's creating a dictionary, you might imagine I'll start with the dictionary definition. And a binary is the numerical system based on only the numericals 0 and 1, a binary. Or it is a division into two groups or classes that are considered diametrically opposite. And when we look at the binary, we need to look at the people that influenced it most. Starting from the left, we have Boole, who was a Catalan, really a sort of genius, but also very problematic. And he was around from about 1232 to 1315. We have Leibniz, a German mathematician who lived from 1646 to 1716. And lastly, we have Boole. You Homers should be proud, a British mathematician who was around from 1815 to 1846, died tragically young. And I like to call them the gynaries. So when we start with Boole, a little bit about him: staunch Catholic, really loved math, wrote prolifically, one of the first authors of Catalan literature, over 200 works across very many genres, including romance novel. I would love to learn Catalan because it's a beautiful language, but also to be able to read this romance novel. Really into supporting royals, worked for the royal family, and was really into spreading Catholicism. And was very interested in finding succinct ways to define truth with a capital T. He really didn't like Islam and Judaism, and his life's work and goal was to eradicate Judaism and Islam from the world. He did this through a work called Ars Magna, and really what it was this book that described a universal model to understand reality. When we look at it, there's these beautiful diagrams, and what they are these concentric circles that include, on the left, all of the names and connotations for God. I believe there's 9 of them. And he was hoping that through combining them, so 2 concentric rings that you can spin like a color wheel, you could start to create some binary ideas with them. And as he continued to do this work and he sat through design reviews, they were like, we need more complexity. So he continued to add complexity with each of these figures. And so the first one starts with 2 concentric circles, as does the second. But as he continued, he realized that wasn't enough. And he ended up with the 4th figure, which had 3 concentric circles. And he also created a lot of diagrams to combine these ideas. Now, this is all very abstract. What it looked like and what it said in this table, and I won't read this whole table, so I apologize to anyone who's not able to see this, but effectively he wrote down letters that represented qualities, words for comparison like difference, majority, equality, minority, interrogative words like whether, when, where, and then entities like God and angels and man, etc. And I just love that through this you can ask yourself the question, why man has power from the beginning? But all of this to say what he wanted to do was to create a framework where he could go up to any Jewish person or Muslim person and quantifiably prove to them that Christianity was truth. And that's a really messed up concept, but Boole also gave us a lot of symbology. He really was what started this thinking around the binary, and he created a way to codify meaning and did a tremendous amount of work for combinatorics, which we still use today. The problem with this is that he wanted to banish all erroneous opinions with his work. Yikes. And to him, the erroneous opinions were represented by Judaism and Islam. About 300 years later, one of his fanboys, Gottfried Leibniz, the German, really read a lot of his work and built upon it and found a more, I would say, pragmatic approach. And Leibniz has a lot of fan boys himself, including Denis Diderot, who said, when one compares the talents one has with Leibniz, one is tempted to throw away one's books and go die quietly in the dark of some forgotten corner. I just want everyone to know that imposter syndrome has been around for a really long time. And really, we think of Leibniz as the father of the binary system, as well as someone who helped us to create symbology, a code as well, and to create a sense of arithmetic. But he didn't do this alone, and Joachim Bouvet was a French missionary who spent a lot of time in China, and you can see here he's depicted in a very culturally appropriate outfit. If you are a white man in this audience, do not wear this outfit. It's culturally appropriative. Bouvet worked for King Louis XIV, and I don't know if any of you are history nerds, but King Louis XIV had a hobby of collecting more land. That was kind of his thing. And so he sent people off to collect more land and to evangelize Catholicism, which is why Bouvet was in China. And Bouvet was obsessed with the I Ching. The I Ching is an ancient text that speaks of divination, essentially. And to break it down, it's this book of diagrams that have short little ticks and then a big circle around it. And there's been many interpretations of the I Ching throughout the years. And the I Ching was based on the idea of yin and yang. And yin and yang are represented by a solid line, unbroken, and a broken line. Well, when Beauvais was in China, he communicated with Leibniz and wrote him and told him that the I Ching is a really great framework. And Leibniz didn't know that much about Chinese culture, and so he took this opportunity to learn through these letters. And what Beauvais was really excited about is that it was a way that he could start to explain God. Like, I felt like he was thinking, he was kind of a teacher's pet, I get the sense of, to Louis XIV, and so he saw this as his in to create something to prove, again, God, similar to Boole. Well, his friend, Leibniz, was a little bit of a thief, and he sent him a copy of this. And he got an idea from it. And his idea was to take the symbols for yin and yang and to instead represent them with ones and zeros. You might be familiar with this concept today. So, order matters. So what he sent back was what Leibniz sent back to Beauvais is a piece that he wrote, and it is the explanation of binary arithmetic. He basically found a way to add and subtract all of these binary numbers. And a lot of calculations ensue. And a really cute fact about him is that he wasn't very good, actually, at math, and so a lot of his work has a lot of errors in it, but this is correct. It wasn't until many years later that George Boole connected this to the modern idea that we know today of Boolean. Boole did a lot. He created Boolean algebra, which is represented as a data type. And he also has a lunar crater named after him, which I never knew that was a goal I had, but now it is. And Boole was married to Mary Everest Boole. You may know the name Everest. It's actually Everest. But she was really into parapsychology, which if you look into that, it's what we would call some woo-woo shit. And she, too, was a self-taught mathematician, so I like to think they had really steamy nights together. And the least interesting fact, she was married to George Boole. So Mary Everest Boole was the niece of George Everest. George Everest is what Mount Everest is named after. Don't get me started on that dichotomy. But George Everest worked in India and would often speak to George Boole about a lot of the philosophy that he learned while he was there. And a fun fact about him is though he helped to hire the people that eventually measured Mount Everest, he had never been. So homeboy has a mountain named after him, a kind of big deal mountain, and he had never even seen it. So life goal 2, have a massive mountain named after me and never see it. So the ideas that he brought back to Boole at the dinner table were this idea of Indian atomism, and it's basically breaking down a lot of complex ideas into atoms, dyads, if you know, you know, and triads. So Boole took this idea and wrote something called laws of thought. And from that, what he got was taking operators and turning them into Boolean. So he built upon the work of Leibniz of creating plus, minus, multiplication, division, so addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, and then turning them into Boolean operators like and, not, or, and not or. And taking values of 0 and 1 and connecting them to true and false. Feels a little sketchy to me. So if we look at what truth is defined in the Boolean sense, true is not false. Cool. P is not equal to Q. Or P is equal to not Q. But we need to examine this idea of truth. And when we look at truth, again, etymology nerd, truth comes from the I'm going to butcher this, West Saxon word for trud. And that's fun because West Saxon is close to here, so you all can hang your hat on the fact that you basically invented the concept of truth. But when we look at truth, it has three core definitions. 1, fidelity. 2, loyalty, and 3, veracity. The first two definitions were what were commonly understood before about the 14th century, or the 1400s rather, excuse me. And the idea of truth was whether you were true to who you were or loyal to the people around you and to your ideas. It wasn't until much later that truth became associated with veracity, or that idea of being correct. And when we break this down, fidelity is about faith, loyalty is about the social aspect, and veracity is the technical one, and that's what we know it to be today. Another important distinction is that that sort of truth, the connection of being right and wrong, is truth with a lowercase t. For anyone who got a philosophy degree, first of all, I'm sorry you wasted that much money. If you paid for it, we have to pay for it in our garbage country. But that is a core concept of philosophy, is lowercase t and capital T. This is also known as logical truth. But when we look at fidelity and faith and those ideas, that's much more about capital T truth. And that is what is known as philosophical truth. And so what Lull, Leibniz, and Boole all had in common, besides that they all have L's in their name, is that they were looking to find a way to prove capital T truth with lowercase t truth. And human existence, I have to say here, I promise I did not smoke anything, is, and will always be about searching for meaning. And this idea, though, we have to break it down a little bit. Taking logical truth and converting it to philosophical truth has some problems with it. Well, first of all, we take logical truth and we have these abstract variables like p, q, all the way to n, and then we're converting it using Boolean operators like and, or, etc. And then we're trying to extract from that the meaning of life. Yikes. We can see that when Lull was trying to do this, there were some problems. But let's break it down. Humans determine what the variables p and q are. We determine if we want to use p, q, we determine how many variables we want to use, and then we get to assign them the meaning. So we could say p is equal to dogs are good, q equals racism does not exist. And then we determine the expressions. So we can say p is registered as truth, we can set our variable, and then we say if p, then q. And then the computer is only doing one thing, which is to check whether the logic is consistent. So if p is equal to true, then q is also equal to true, based on what we told it to do. And the thing is, humans are complex. I don't know if anyone here has ever dated, but I can tell you from years of dating experience that humans are not simple. Computers, I've never tried to date a computer. I'm not that, what is that movie with her? Yeah, never tried to date my phone. But when we look at where Lull ran into problems, we can see that he got to the third, fourth figures, and he had all these ideas. And whenever you have these types of variables being matched like this, if you go in one direction, you add more variables, you're adding linear complexity. When you add variables in the other way, when you're combining the two rings, you're starting to build geometric complexity. When you add another ring, you start to create exponential complexity. And then if you do it again, you have what's called super exponential complexity. Modern computers cannot solve super exponential problems. In fact, they can't even solve exponential ones. Has anyone here heard of the traveling salesperson problem? Cool, then I'll explain it. So it is a problem that is commonly used in computing to test the speed of a computer, basically, and testing the algorithms. And essentially what it is given a list of cities and the distances between each pair of cities, what is the shortest possible route that visits each city and returns to the origin city. And what we have here is a smattering of city dots and then a line that seeks to connect them. And to date, this is a problem that is only solvable in one way, and you would think that it would be better than this, but it's basically for the computer to test every single possibility. It's called brute force testing. And that problem is what is known as NP complex, which basically means that there is no way to depict this in an algorithm that we know to date. And that problem was even simpler than the one that Boole created. So again, coming back to this idea of logical truth versus philosophical truth, setting variables, using operators, and searching for the meaning of life, there's another conundrum, which is that logical truth must be persistently true for all variables. And philosophical truth is variable, it's undefined, it's relative to who we are as individuals. So there's some problems that arise with this. In another way, we're trying to take complex ideas, feed them into simple systems, and hope for simple outcomes, but we're never able to turn something, convert something with computers. Computers just spit out what we tell them to spit out. And can you just imagine like these three guys creating this binary project together, like the retro that they would have? Like the task that they set out to do was to find meaning and truth, and they, to date, still haven't done that. And then you have here Boole, who created himself another task to eliminate Judaism and Islam, won an invalid task, also didn't finish it. And then they did something else. They invented the binary. And that's equivalent to when you do something and you haven't written on your to-do list and you write it down. That's what they did. And this problem was completely out of scope. Their poor project manager must be so stressed. The binary was an accident, really. No one was setting out to try to create the machine or the methodology that we use today. But it was a helpful one. This entire talk isn't just to rag on the binary, because that would be ironic if I were just very binary about it. And the binary was really helpful when it was able to be connected to physical computing. I'm going to skip a lot of computer history here because Simon told me I couldn't teach an entire course here today. So we'll just talk that basically punch cards, that was kind of important. And then the next thing, which is Gordon, and he was the creator of silicon transistors. And when I was looking this up, and I was looking up transistors, I found this gem of a website. It's very 1990, I think the copyright's down there still, 1999. It's fully responsive and accessible. When I increase the font size, the design doesn't break. It's really lovely. Just thought I'd share that. But the part that I loved of this is that Gordon Teal of Texas Instruments stood up to give his talk, similar to how I am now, and he pulled 3 small objects out of his pocket and said, "Contrary to what my colleagues have told you about the bleak prospects for silicon transistors, I happen to have a few of them here in my pocket." Which I just think is a really cute thing to say. Like, he pulled them out of his pocket and was like, "They think they're useless? Well, I have them here in my pocket." Like, what? That doesn't tell me anything. But it turns out he was right, and it was a big deal. So we're going to talk about how this impacted us. So to start talking about this, we have to meet here Ferdinand Saussure. He was a Swiss philosopher who had a thing for languages, so hard relate. And he really founded the idea of structuralism. Structuralism is a methodology that implies that elements of human culture must be understood by way of their relationship to a broader overarching system or structure. Said another way, he thinks it's bunk. He would think it was bunk if we tried to, I don't know, say, contain all of the knowledge of a religion or of society and try to get a computer to spit out something that made sense. And in fact, he was very anti-binary. He created, also based in structuralism, this idea that was called the binary opposition, which is that the means by which the units of language have value or meaning, each unit is defined in reciprocal determination with another term. Okay, what does that even mean? What he's saying is that whatever you're using to define it gets to be the signifier, an active role in power, and the thing that is in contradiction to it is merely the signified. And that idea is going to be different for all of us. So let's say we're doing a binary of day and night, and I'm a Dracula. I only understand night. So I'm going to define night, and then day is just the opposite of night. Same thing for good and evil. So good and evil can also be described as good and not good. And one of my favorite French artists, René Magritte, played with this idea when he depicted a picture of a pipe in this painting, and it says, "Ceci n'est pas une pipe." I don't know, pipe. And that's playing with the idea that that's not actually a pipe being depicted. The painting is called The Treachery of Images. And then when I was reading, this is not necessarily directly in the main thread, but I found this quote just delightful. Jean-Jacques Rousseau was a really important French philosopher, and he said, "Our tongues are better suited to writing than speaking, and there is more pleasure in reading us than in listening to us." And he's speaking about Western languages like French and Italian. And then he says, "The words do not convey half the meaning. All effectiveness is in the tone of voice. Judging the Orientals from their books is like painting a man's portrait from his corpse." Further in this passage, where he's describing languages, he talks about how Oriental, quote unquote, don't ever use that word, or Asian languages are soft and that they don't have hard boundaries ingrained in them like Western languages did. And so he thought that intrinsically Western languages were more suited to talk about hard sciences and logic and facts. So the first impact this has is really about power. And typically, when I do a talk, I do a land acknowledgement, and I pay respect to whose land has been unceded, who we are borrowing. This is especially the case if I do talks in the United States or in Canada, and when I go to Australia, I will do that. But it's a little bit awkward here, doing a land acknowledgement. As Florence said, I mean, we're still colonizing land, so I could pay respect to the marginalized people that the majoritized people are colonizing. But instead, I want to talk about British colonization. The British Empire referred to itself as the empire on which the sun never sets. And what that's saying is that virtually in every time zone in the world, they had colonized something. And if we look at the numbers, it's true. The British Empire held 23% of the population and 24% of the total land. That is some big colonizer energy y'all got. And jokes aside, colonization is our context. Colonization is still very real. It is the infrastructure, it is a tool, it is a technology, as Florence said. And when we look at the timeline of our binaries, we can see that colonization played a really strong role. With Lull, he was under the Spanish Empire, and they were trying to colonize all of the different sub-communities there. Columbus went on his colonization tours. We had ideas of mercantilism, stocks, the Industrial Revolution, and where we are today. And that effectively, all of those points in time connect the ideas of colonization with capitalism. And capitalism is a tool of colonization. So when we look at our power dynamic in the way that Saussure might want us to, we can see that this is building a relationship with the colonizer and the colonized. And you can see this pervade in our language. We call white people and people of color. We call people abled and disabled. Everything is through the context of the other. And with this power comes the power for the colonizer to determine what the relationship is with the colonized. And so when I told you earlier that humans determine the variables and functions, it's actually colonizers that determine the variables and functions. And we have to remember that everything is and will always be about power under this system. Colonization is about obtaining power. That's why Jeff Bezos continues to rake in more money. At this point, it's not about how much more money he can make. He has an obscene amount of money. And it's about the power that he gains from it. If you ever want to be creeped out, Bill Gates had a passage on a Netflix show called The Patriot Act with Hassan Minhaj, and he talks about how he is not interested in politics because he has far more power and freedom where he is right now. And I like to think that, or I like to see how everyone thinks that he's like the good one to come out of all of the tech bros, and we all know that that's Tom from MySpace, so move on. But we have to look at this idea of binarism and see how it reinforces our individual power. Hashtag not all individuals, and hashtag your mileage may vary. I do another talk called How Privilege Defines Perspective, and in it I talk about this grid which depicts who has the most power, which is white, wealthy, Protestant cis males who are able-bodied, heterosexual, neurotypical, and American, or in this case, British. Still applies here. And when we do what Saussure said, he said that we can basically put every set of terms side by side and start to see a really aggregate list of things. White, wealthy, abled, hetero-cis male citizen, say, who's neurotypical, is diametrically opposed to someone who is black, poor, disabled, queer, trans, non-binary, neurodivergent, and an immigrant. And so what the people in power can determine is that what's on the left is good, and what's on the right is bad. And that's what we have done. And binarism not only reinforces the individual power for the people that possess those traits, but binarism reinforces systemic power. That infrastructure I just showed you is an aspect of systemic power. And there's this idea that there were schools of thought that helped to determine social influence. And the monarch holds very strong in that, and apparently here you still have that too, though I've heard that some stuff's getting shaken up. And the monarch oversees everything, but also there's the clergy or religion, and then there's the nobility, and then there's commoners like us plebs. And it wasn't until, I would say, media became more of a thing and news began to spread as mercantilism was created, that media was added to this list. So media also has a strong hold on what defines truth. And now science, and I would integrate technology as part of that, also is the fifth or sixth pillar of this social deterministic infrastructure. And what we have to remember is that in that diagram, while monarchs are at the top, technologists provide a lot of power to politicians. Where I live in the United States, politicians are equivalent to our royalty, them and the Kardashians. And technologies have always provided power to politicians, as you saw with the binaries, but we still do that here today. I think you recognize that as Mark Zuckerberg testifying for Congress. And even if the technology carries the intent to help, if it is used to harm, we too are complicit. We have to remind ourselves of that. And when we look at this monarch in the structure that we have today, we have to recognize that it's not just about monarchs, it's also about the wealthiest. So what does that mean? Well, that means that Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, Jack Dorsey, and Mark Zuckerberg are all our royalty and monarchs as well. And a fun fact, I wanted to make all of these pictures tie together, so I decided it would be funny if I found their selfies. And there's a bit of a joke in all of them. So first of all, that's the only selfie I could find of Jeff Bezos that was appropriate for this audience. Elon Musk is taking a mirror selfie, and it's one of the few I've seen where his mirror is clean. So I think that's how he got swiped right on by Grimes. And that's Jack, just after he lit his Gwyneth Paltrow goop candle. And that's Mark Zuckerberg, bravely with a sticker that said, "I voted." Okay, Mark, so did Vladimir Putin, thanks to you. And we have to recognize this is the bad place. We are here in the bad place. So how do we fix it? Well, first and foremost, question the binary as we have today. Everyone can write that on your to-do list and cross it off. Feels gratifying. And to do that, we can opt to be additive over reductive. And if you spend any time on Stack Overflow or on Twitter or anywhere people can talk to you, the way we talk is very reductive. We're always trying to reduce things down to truths rather than allowing truth to be expansive. Instead of using radio boxes, we could use check boxes, metaphorically. And an easy way to question the binary is to try the ternary. So if someone asks you a yes or no or this or that question, invite a ternary, invite a third option, even if that option is I don't know, because that forces us to expand beyond the binary and to see the world in a bit more complex way as it is. Use and instead of or. Invite the word maybe into your life. Leave space for what you don't know and what we don't know. State fewer facts and more curiosities. And if binarism is the problem, you might be saying, for you devil's advocates, what about non-binary computers? Well, first of all, non-binary computers would be way cuter. Like some days they'd wear lipstick, and some days they wouldn't. They'd wear dresses some days, or suits others. But they do exist, and they're called qubits. And qubits basically take that idea of binary, so binary computers using on and off switches in the transistors, and instead it allows the switch to be in perpetual motion. So then the state is determined by whether, of how you view the switch at a particular time. So for those of you who are philosophy nerds, again, very sorry that you have a useless degree still, this is basically Schrodinger's cat, but for computers. I don't know about you, and I've spent the last however many weeks reading about this stuff, but complexity is the problem. So to introduce a computer that can provide more complexity is not necessarily the answer. And technology is not our answer, and it doesn't need to be our answer for all things. I have a little story for you. Pretend right now it's 1864 in England, so maybe not too much is different, fewer cell phones maybe. And a husband walks to work in the rain. Miles, I think, here, because you oddly don't use kilometers, but you do use 24-hour time. And he gives a lecture while he's drenched. He's really committed to his job. And when he gets home, his wife worries, and she's decided that since water was the thing that caused the problem, that it would be the thing to fix him. So she just covers him in wet blankets and makes him, keeps him in this little vat of water, basically. Well, sad story, but the husband dies of pneumonia. This is how George Boole died. His wife took the thing that harmed him and tried to heal him with it. Remember when I told you she was into woo-woo stuff? That was one of the woo-woo things. And I think we need to learn a lesson from the premature death of George Boole, which is that technology cannot solve human problems without also causing them, or causing more different ones. And when we look at ancient, powerful civilizations, we will see a pattern. Ancient Egypt built its empire with agriculture. It also fell by it. Mesopotamia built upon that and added irrigation. It also fell by it. The Roman Empire made its name by conquest. Well, the Roman Empire kept having to borrow money from new countries that they colonized or took over and conquested to pay for the ones that they're expanding. Because as it turns out, when you buy a scare quote property, you have to take care of it and you have to figure out infrastructure for it. So they basically borrowed from their future selves, and I'm not great with money, but I'm pretty sure that's how you go into debt. And to today, where we think we can solve everything by taking more data. We heard a lot about this and the dangers of it from Laura's talk. And quite honestly, we've already stolen from our future generations, ones who are already alive. Remember when I was a kid and we learned about indigenous peoples named the seventh generation, and their philosophy was to make sure that they were only using resources to preserve for at least 7 generations, that everything they were using was being borrowed by 7 generations of descendants. Well, I'm sorry to say, I think that we did not take that philosophy seriously when, I'm using royal we here, when we colonized them and massacred them when we arrived. And so I think that this is going to be a hot take, but efficiency is not our answer. There's something called Jevons Paradox, and it's basically that whenever something becomes more efficient, we use fewer resources to do the same thing, that means that it becomes more available to more people. Pricing-wise, it goes down. That also means that it provides more access, and we end up consuming more. So when things become more efficient, it actually doesn't make us use fewer resources, it actually makes us use more. And so I have to remind you that efficiency is a tool of capitalism. It wants us to use more, buy more, consume more, feed more into the system. And when I was looking at the other day, I'm kind of a shit poster on Twitter, so if you follow me, just be ready for a lot of really nonsensical things. I overshare about my dating life, etc. But sometimes I share really helpful stuff, like about coding and stuff. But anyway, I asked, and I took a poll, who do you go on an inescapable all-day date with? A, Jeff Bezos, B, Jack Dorsey, C, Elon Musk, or D, Mark Zuckerberg. And I was watching this poll live, and Elon Musk rushed into taking about half of the dates right away and held it for 4,000 votes. And I was just like, oh my gosh. But then I don't actually, I mean, I know who I would pick, but I'm not about to share. But I'm surprised by Elon Musk. But why I'm sharing this with you today is I know there's at least 100 of you, statistically speaking, that are Elon Musk fan people. So I'm going to say something that you should definitely listen to, because it might change your mind. So even if we build an effective or an efficient Cybertruck, it still contributes to an anti-environmental infrastructure. Driving intrinsically is anti-environmental. And I have to ask, do we really want to allow a white, able-bodied man who has created exploitative technology and grew up complicit under apartheid in South Africa to colonize Mars? What mental models do you think he has? Come on, like, do Nelson Mandela a favor. Learn how to unlearn. This one is very hard. Trust me, I've spent a lot of emotional labor trying to unlearn things and to teach people to unlearn, and it is not easy. And right now, I have a store, and I want to share not a mistake, but an opportunity for learning I had. I thought I was very clever, and I create these little techie shirt things and t-shirts, I guess they're called, and jumpers. And this one says, "The Futura is female," and yes, it is in Futura. And I also have one that says, "The future is non-binary," and I also have it in other languages. And fun fact, this joke holds true if you translate future into French, l'avenir, it still works, and that one's in l'avenir, or avenir. Anyway, this is a learning opportunity, and this is a sponsored post. Sorry, Simon. I did not get this approved by Simon. And what I want to look at is this idea of non-binary as a word. Non-binary adds the word non to binary. And non is the lack of something. Non is that saying to non-binary people what they are isn't enough. And when we look at the idea of binary, I think we need to expand our thinking a bit. So this is us, and that's binary thinking, who's looking after us, and spectral thinking is what we should be going after. And so right now I'm going to do something that you probably will hate me for, but it's okay, I'm really excited. I have designed a new shirt, which is that the Futura is spectral. So what I'm going to do right now is post on Twitter a link that I've queued. Duolingo just told me I dropped out of the top 10. It's so stressful. Would you mind if I just stepped off and did some Duolingo for a sec, Simon? Okay, sorry. All right, so I'm going to tweet this right now. And it is a link to my store where you can buy The Futura is Spectral. And for every shirt that is purchased here, $5 will either go to Black Girls Code, or for ones that are purchased by attendees here, use the code NA2020. I will donate all the part of the proceeds to a local Nottingham charity for being such kind hosts to us. Again, sponsored ad. So when we start to examine the future being spectral, we need to first focus inward and to reject the binary within. And we have a tendency to group people as being good or bad. It's something we hear a lot when someone makes a mistake. Someone will say, oh, but they're a good person. You know they didn't mean it that way. They're not a bad person, like, et cetera, et cetera. And I have another hot take, which is I don't believe in good and bad people. One of the books that influenced me was East of Eden by John Steinbeck. I'm a huge Steinbeck fan. And in East of Eden, he talks about this idea of the inheritance of the original sin. And he mirrors the idea of Cain and Abel with these two brothers, one who inherits the original sin. And in it, he has this phrase, thou mayest. And when I look at that, I want to remind everyone in this room that I don't think you're a bad person. But sorry, love, you're not a good person either. Because what is the cost of a bad act? What is the value of a good one? And what's the statute of limitations when we make a mistake? Who's the judge, the jury, the executioner? If we've learned one thing today, I'm going to tell you it's the people in power. Just look at the criminal justice system, in America especially. So what happens when a good character does a bad act? Is it consequence? Is it fate? Were they fated to do it? But what if a bad character does a good act? How do we reconcile those two things? Is one better than the other? Is one worse? Is there redemption or is it fate? I think we have to remember that character is mutable. And that this idea of separating art from the artist, like if an artist makes a mistake, we quote unquote cancel them, and they don't actually get canceled because everyone should know now that any publicity is good publicity. Still, just look at R. Kelly. But we need to hold space for people to change. And I would ask that instead of separating art from artists, we flip that around and we connect the art to its context. So if the artist does something bad and then they do the work to unpack and unlearn and do more art, we have that new context now. To do this, we need to remember that the words people say are fleeting. Instead, actions are the countable things. Actions are our context. And as I told you, I can't give this talk without recognizing the binary has given us so much. I mean, think about the fact that we now know what a black hole looks like. That was in part due to the invention of the binary. And there are important binaries to embrace. Here's one. The great black feminist Angela Davis said, in a racist society, it is not enough to be non-racist, we must be anti-racist. That's a binary I can get behind. When we break that down and we look at the chart I showed you earlier about our individual power, we need to remember that there is an infrastructure at play. There is racism, classism, disableism, anti-queer, anti-trans, and anti-immigration ideas that feed this. So we have to be anti-racist, anti-classist, anti-disablist, pro-queer, pro-trans, and pro-immigrant. That is the only way we can move forward. It is not enough to simply not be those things. We must be anti those things, as she said. And when we do that, we must start with ourselves, look within as individuals, and we must inspire our communities, which will then eventually start to change our societies. And we also need to remember that the binary is what reinforces that individual power. But it's not about just handing over the power to the marginalized people, because if we do that, we need to take the power away from centered people. What happens if we do that is that we, sorry, I got turned up. We have to take the power away from centered people, and then we need to dismantle the system that values power, colonization. We need to be anti-colonization. And then, once we do that, we need to recognize that the inputs that we create, all the facts that we tell ourselves, and the methodologies, the Boolean algebra, the ways that we analyze the world, and the ways that we create our technology, we need to use that to create structural change, tear down monarchies, eat the rich, whatever you want to say, that's what we need to do. And the great E.O. Wilson, who is one of my personal heroes, and I've been grateful to meet, he was a biologist who just has the most beautiful things to say, was obsessed with ants, said this: evolution, including genetic progress and in human nature and human capacity, will be from now on increasingly the domain of science and technology, tempered by ethics and political choice. Soon, we must look deep within ourselves and decide what we wish to become. If you think about where AI is going and how we're taking all of this big data, this big racist, classist, and colonist data, and feeding it into all of those same systems of oppression and what it's getting out, I think what he's saying to us is that the artificial intelligence that we create is going to be a reflection of ourselves. So we first must change ourselves, and that will change the technology that we create. But here's the thing, morality mustn't be the currency of others. Every day on Twitter, I see somebody shaming someone for working at one of the big 5 companies. And, you know, I don't know if I would or not. I don't know what my circumstances are. Maybe I would need healthcare so badly. Maybe it's something that will help to advance my family and break some of the structural oppression that I've experienced. I don't know their context. I only know mine. So I can only spend my own morality. It is only my currency. But we're very quick to spend it for other people while not examining our own things. If you want to just look at some ableist trash, just look at people getting all up in arms about straws. And then read the perspectives of disabled people and what it does to them. It's important to remember that we cannot force things upon each other, but we can inspire them. And I hope I've done that today, to inspire you a little bit. And I'm going to remind you that this will, it's not going to be hard, it's going to be not easy. Binary joke. Unlearning is work. We will mess up. And when you mess up, apologize, don't make it about you, and learn from that lesson. Resistance must be resilience. And so when we create technology, let's stop creating it for efficiency. Let's create it for resilience, because resilience is what allows us humans to live another day. E.O. Wilson said something, and I'm going to paraphrase, which is basically that if humans kill ourselves off, it does nothing bad to the rest of the ecosystem. But if ants or bugs or bees were to leave the world, the entire system will collapse. And I think we know how bees are doing right now. Again, this will be not easy. And so in East of Eden, there is a word, Timshel. And I did the thing, which is so annoying, where I Googled it, and I didn't want to get it wrong. And, well, John Steinbeck got it wrong. Timshel, which he translated to thou mayest, isn't actually translated that way. He had a slight spelling error. It's Timshel, which means something totally different. But we're going to hold on to the idea of it. We're going to let him make that mistake and learn from it. Timshel means thou mayest. And so I hope after today, we can all move forward from everything we've learned, and we mayest proceed together. Thank you.